What is the evidence of the Jewish people excelling? Well, it's really quite extraordinary, especially when we think back over the last 200 years or so, since the Jewish people were liberated, more or less, under Napoleon in France, and later so many hundreds of thousands came from Europe and other places, especially the Pale of Settlement in Russia, and were able to come west to other countries where they were free and no longer had the restrictions that they experienced for so many centuries in Europe and elsewhere before that. Now, in the West, they were able to blossom, to flourish, and we began to see amazing things happening. Whether we think of someone like Jonas Salk, the inventor of the polio vaccine, or Albert Einstein and the theory of relativity. In so many fields, Jewish people brought new ideas, new creativity, new genius to those areas of life and those fields that had not had them before. Now, this doesn't mean, of course, that every Jewish person is a genius, by no means. But it does mean that God has corporately blessed the Jewish people in a way that has enriched the world. I remember as a young boy, I had started taking the violin, and my own personal goal was to become the greatest violinist I could be. And my personal heroes and the people I emulated were people like Isaac Stern, Yehudi Menuhin, David Oistrakh. These were great violinists. They were the greatest violinists at the time in the world. And one thing I realized one day was, they're all Jewish, or nearly so. The list of the greatest violinists were Jewish. And that thought and realization stunned me. I also grew up in a musical home. My mother was a pianist and church organist for a long time, and of course our home was filled with music. And I realized later on that many of those great classics and some of the greatest performers, for example, were Jewish. And they had this amazing impact on the world of music. But it extends far beyond that into so many other fields of medicine, of the arts, of areas like comedy and film production. But we could think, for example, of one of the most intellectual games in the world, and that is chess. Jewish people have excelled at chess. The greatest chess champions in history really have almost all been Jewish, or many of them have. And when you think of that tiny percentage that they are of the world population, again, it's amazing. I think of an example that I bring out in my book on Jewish giftedness about a boy who was 8 years old, Samuel Reshevsky, in France, around 1920. And he's playing a group of chess masters in France. And these older men are looking at this young boy in amazement because he's playing many of them at the same time. He was able to keep all of these individual games against chess masters in his head and outdo them. It was quite extraordinary. And we see that, though, in other fields as well, that Jewish contributions are immense. And we speak of something like comedy. That is looking at the human dimension of life, all the things we experience, and being able to laugh at some of those things by putting it in a certain perspective. It's a way of bringing out what's inside of us. And Jewish people, many of them, are very gifted in this way as comedians to be able to draw on those experiences and be able to put them in a way that will inspire others, make them laugh. It's amazing. But it's not just that. It's also other areas of communication where we can think of someone like Steven Spielberg and the great films that he has produced, but also the great Hollywood film studios that, for the most part, have been run by Jewish people. And so they have had an immense, incredible impact on the culture. And we need to be praying for those men and women that they will come to faith, because you can see the incredible impact they've already had. And the important thing is that we pray that many of them would come to faith and help lead the world in reaching people with the gospel instead of secular themes or other things. But that's part of the impact and the contribution of the Jewish people, which is immense. From science to music to comedy to film, The list goes on, and it's one that impacts all of our lives and one that we should be taking special note of because it's a big part of our world today.